Dracula by Bram Stoker, Chapter 21, Dr. Seward's Diary, 3rd of October. Let me put down with exactness all that happened, as well as I can remember it, since I made an entry. Not a detail that I can recall must be forgotten. In all calmness, I must proceed. When I came to Renfield's room, I found him lying on the floor, on his left side in a glittering pool of blood. When I went to move him, it became at once apparent that he had received some terrible injuries. There seemed none of that unity of purpose between the parts of the body which marks even lethargic sanity. As the face was exposed, I could see that it was horribly bruised, as though it had been beaten against the floor. Indeed, it was from the face wounds that the pool of blood originated. The attendant, who was kneeling beside the body, said to me, as we turned him over, "I think, sir, that his back is broken. See, both his right arm and legs and the whole side of his face are paralyzed." How such a thing could have happened puzzled the attendant beyond measure. He seemed quite bewildered, and the brows were gathered in as he said, "I can't understand the two things. He could mark his face like that by beating his own head on the ground. I saw a young woman do it once at Eversfield Asylum before anyone could lay hands on her, and I suppose he might well have broke his back by falling out of bed, but if he got an awkward kink, for the life of me I can't imagine how the two things occurred. If his back was broke, he couldn't beat his head, and if his face was like that before the fall out of the bed, there would be marks of it." I said to him, "Go to Dr. Van Helsing and ask him to kindly come here at once. I want him without an instant's delay." The man ran off, and within a very few minutes the professor and his dressing gown and slippers arrived. When he saw Renfield on the ground, he looked keenly at him, and turned to me. I think he recognized by my thoughts in my eyes, for he said very quietly, manifestly for the ears of the attendant, "Ah, a sad accident. He will need very careful watching and much attention. I shall stay with you myself, but I shall first dress myself. If you will remain, I shall make a few minutes to join." The patient was now breathing stertorously, and it was easy to see that he had suffered some terrible injury. Van Helsing returned with extraordinary celerity, bearing with him a surgical case. He had evidently been thinking, and had his mind made up, for almost before he looked at the patient he whispered to me, "Send the attendant away. We must be alone with him when he becomes conscious after the operation." So I said, "I think that will do now, Simmons. We have done all that we can at present. You had better go to your round. Dr. Van Helsing will operate. Let me know instantly if there be anything unusual anywhere." The man withdrew, and went in strict examination of the patient. The wounds to the face were superficial. The real injury was a depressed fracture of the skull, extending right up through the motor area. The professor thought a moment and said, "We must reduce the pressure and get back to normal conditions as far as can be. The rapidity of the suffusion shows the terrible nature of his injury. The whole motor area seems affected. The suffusion of the brain will increase quickly, so we must trephine at once, or it may be too late." As he was speaking, there was a soft tapping at the door. I went over and opened it, and found the corridor without Arthur and Quincy in pajamas and slippers. The former spoke. "I heard your man call up Dr. Van Helsing and tell him of the accident, so I woke Quincy, or rather called for him, as he was not asleep. Things are moving too quickly and too strongly for sound sleep for any of us these times. I've been thinking that tomorrow night things have been as they were. We'll have to look back and forward a little more than we have done. We may come in." I nodded, and held the door open till they had entered. Then I closed it again. When Quincy saw the attitude and state of the patient, and noted the horrible pool on the floor, he said softly, "My God, what has happened to him? Poor devil." I told him briefly, and added that we expected he would recover consciousness after the operation, for a short time at all events. He went on at once and sat down on the edge of the bed, with Goldeming beside him. We all watched in patience. "We shall wait," said Van Helsing, "just long enough to fix the best spot for trephining, so that we may most quickly and perfectly remove the blood clot, for it is evident that the hemorrhage is increasing." The minutes during which we waited passed with fearful slowness. I had a horrible sinking in my heart, and from Van Helsing's face I gathered that he felt some fear or apprehension as to what was to come. I dreaded the words that Renfield might speak. I was positively afraid to think the conviction of what was coming was on me. as I have read of men who have heard the death watch. The poor man's breathing came in uncertain gasps. Each instant he seemed as though he would open his eyes and speak, but then would follow a prolonged stertorous breath and would relapse into a more fixed insensibility. Inured as I was to sick beds and death, this suspense grew and grew upon me. I could almost hear the beating of my own heart, and the blood surging through my temples sounded like blows from a hammer. The silence finally became agonizing. I looked at my companions, one after another, and saw from their flushed faces and damp brows that they were enduring equal torture. There was a nervous suspense over us all, and through overhead some dread bell would peal out powerfully when we should least expect it. At last there came a time when it was evident that the patient was sinking fast. He might die at any moment. I looked up at the professor and caught his eye fixed on mine. His face was sternly set as he spoke. "There is no time to lose. His words may be worth many lives. I had been thinking so. I stood here. It may be there is a soul at stake. We shall operate, just above the ear." Without another word he made the operation. For a few moments the breathing continued to be stertorous. Then there came a breath so prolonged that it seemed as though it would tear open his chest. Suddenly his eyes opened and became fixed in a wild, helpless stare. This was continued a few moments, then it softened into a glad surprise, and from the lips came a sigh of relief. He moved convulsively, and as he did so said, "Oh, be quiet, doctor. Tell them to take off the strait waistcoat. I have had a terrible dream, and it has left me so weak that I cannot move. What's wrong with my face? It feels all swollen, and it smarts dreadfully." He tried to turn his head, but even with the effort his eyes seemed to grow glassy again, so I gently put it back. Then Van Helsing said in a quiet, grave tone, "Tell us your dream, Mr. Renfield." As he heard the voice his face brightened as though in mutilation, and he said, "That is Dr. Van Helsing. How good it is of you to be here. Give me some water. My lips are dry. I shall try to tell you. I dreamed—" He stopped and seemed fainting. I called quietly to Quincy, "The brandy. It is in my study. Quick." He flew and returned with a glass, the decanter of brandy, and a carafe of water. We moistened his parched lips, and the patient quickly revived. It seemed, however, that his poor injured brain had been working in the interval, for when he was quite conscious he looked at me piercingly with agonized confusion, which I shall never forget, and said, "I must not deceive myself. It was no dream, but all grim reality." Then his eyes roved around the room as he caught sight of the two figures sitting patiently on the edge of the bed. He went on, "If I were not sure already, I should know from them." For an instant his eyes closed, not with pain or sleep, but voluntarily, as though he were bringing all his faculties to bear. When he opened them he said, hurriedly, and with more energy than he had yet displayed, "Quick, doctor, quick, I am dying. I feel that I have but a few minutes, and then I must go back to death, or worse. Wet my lips in brandy again. I have something that I must say before I die, or before my poor crushed brain dies anyhow. Thank you. It was the night after you left me, when I implored you to let me go away. I couldn't speak then, for I felt my tongue was tied, but I was sane then, except in that way, as I am now. It was in an agony of despair for a long time after you left me. It seemed hours. Then there came a sudden peace to me, and my brain seemed to become cool again, and I realized where I was.